Hi, everybody. Steve Cady here, and we have a Nexus for Change virtual walk we're taking with Peter Block today. And the session we're focusing on today is of kingdom and community, an exploration of the work of restoration and transformation. And we have a chat room up in which we'll have a parallel conversation going on, and people are over there chatting away. For those of you that are just joining, you can look in your chat box and go on over, and you'll see a link to go on over and chat with us. And our sponsors are the Master Organization Development Program. And the cool thing is we are now in the process of looking at a doctorate in an area that is really related to much of our conversation today. And Peter and I were reflecting on that just a little bit earlier. And the Change Handbook. And I'm very blessed to be at Bowling Green State University. And I'm really glad Peter can be here. And we also have Maggie here, which I'll talk to her in a minute, hopefully. And so just wanted to say hi, Peter.
Hi, Steve.
I put Restore dash Commons there. I mean, I could put a lot of PBI and I could put a variety of stuff, but this is your latest thing that's really important to you. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
You want to say a little bit about Restore Commons?
Well, you do something long enough, at some point you try to figure out what you've been doing and try to find an umbrella that fits it, or a way of framing all the little things you do. So you write books and you give talks and you show up places, participate, and go to meetings. And I realized that my work since the last 20 years has really been trying to restore our sense of the common good. I think the first period of my life was about the commons inside workplaces, inside organizations. And the last is really trying to say to these ideas we have about organizational development and democratization of the world, apply to civic space. And I think the real work is to reclaim our civic space or our communities from the privatization movement that started about 350 years ago. So I thought restoring the commons would be the widest net I could put out to warehouse in one place all the ideas that are life-changing for me. So it's a bookcase.
Yeah.
It's got video and audio and writing on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good material on there, and a great place to connect with other people. I really like that recent podcast you did. That's on there on the front page of the website. So that's great. And you can see there, Peter. I was telling you about the kids. I got Deacon right there, and Roman on the right. In the center is Logan. There's Jackie, my wife, and there's me in the back.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm having a blast. I was up last night with little Logie having a fit, and it was so interesting.
Who was having the fit? You or Logan?
I actually remind myself in those moments to pause and say, I'm blessed to have this moment, even though it's tiring, because I've just really learned that from my friends and wise friends that we sometimes go so fast, we wake up and turn back and look, and we reflect on our lives and reflect on the lack of experiencing those moments and enjoying them, even the tired moments in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And there's John, who can't be with us today, and there's his son in the back who's not enjoying that moment, and his wife, and we're having a lot of fun. So it's really a great time in life for me, and our world, however, is got lots of challenges, and I think what is most important are the people that we walk with. And Peter, do you have a walk that you took with someone that you really enjoyed that you might share with us?
Peter Kestenbaum always comes to mind. I was on my way to I had to run a session. This was back in 1980. And I saw there was a general session, there was a conference on something. And so I thought I'd just sit down and rest before I do my little seminar thing. And I listened to Peter talk, and it blew me away. It was like life-changing. I heard him talk about things from a perspective I'd never considered. And I remember walking up to him after the talk, and I said, I introduced myself. I said, "Where do you live?" And he said, "San Jose, California." And I said, "Can I come and talk to you?" And he said, "Sure." And I did. So I started taking jobs in California, do anything I could do to be in the room. with Peter, and we became friends. And but I can't think of a moment that was more powerful than the moment I still spent with Peter, as far as just kind of the surprised that somebody could hold the world in his mind that way. And so, he's an existential philosopher. And he asked me one time, he says, "Oh, so what's your destiny?" And I kind of had never asked that question before. And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, when are you going to find out?" I said, "Someday." He said, "That's too long to wait." So he took the whole question of purpose, destiny, meaning as human issues, unsolvable. He lives in a world of unsolvability. And there's nothing you can do to coerce him into a solution. And try as I might, except one thing. I once asked him what to name my cat. And he said, "Jacob." And I said, "Why?" And he says, "Because you're always wrestling with the devil." So that was the only answer I got from him. I once asked him what car to buy, and he told me what car to buy. So I bought it. So I've always taken him as the voice of God.
Wow. And some of the folks that were in the chat area, one person said that it's a mentor that they were walking with, another person with their husband, another person just on a trail in Spain. So people were kind of sharing a little bit of places that they've been reflected on theirs. And then there's a little bit of chat about Peter Kastenbaum, and they're talking a little bit about that on there.
Yeah, I actually opened that up, Steve, so I can see that also.
Okay, good. And so what's the point, Peter?
Exactly. I think that's the question. The point is to pursue that question. I had a question I got from Peter, somebody years and years and years ago. And the question was, what's the question, if you had an answer to, would set you free? Okay, what's the question? If you could answer that, would set you free? And I always loved that question. I never really had a response to it for myself. Because freedom has always mattered to me for some reason.
Right.
And about a month ago, I was on the phone being interviewed or something, and it suddenly came to me. And the answer for me, the question, I've always felt all my life that I'd been delivered an invoice at the moment of birth. That when I was born, because I was born, whatever, something was owed. And all my life I've had this kind of energy or drive or compulsion, obsession, neurosis inside of me to kind of justify my existence, to have it mean something. And I think the question that I have that would set me free is whether or not I paid what was due, whether I've delivered on that invoice. And I kind of realized I believe I have. It just hasn't sunk in. So I'm still doing the same neurotic things I've always done.
Peter, are you experiencing the joy of the gift you're giving to the world?
No.
Or how? You got to experience
it. Joy is not in my vocabulary. People have asked me, do you experience joy? And I always have to have them define it. And so I don't, I am aware that I've contributed something important and touched people in important ways. That's a very hard thing to come to terms with. It's very hard for me to respond to your question directly and simply. And if you ask me again, I'll give you a one-word answer.
I get that. I often define joy as the exact middle of depression and obsession.
Exactly. It's a mathematician's joy. But I think my answer to your question is yes.
Good. I'm glad. So
it helps me with my aging. Helps me get old.
Yes, with your buddy.
Yeah, but Walter,
Yeah, and there's some joy right there. You guys,
I
subversive.
know.
You guys, I watched the video, and you guys laugh great together. You like play off.
I know. Walter's, I've always had teachers. I've always had surrogate fathers, brothers, mothers. And Walter is a recent one. It turns out he lives in Cincinnati, and I don't know how long it's been, 4 or 5 years. And he's given me a memory. I had amnesia before. I never, when my family came to the United States, like most Jews, they wanted to be Americans. At least my kind of family did. And the Avalon, the movie, was kind of the story of my family's life.
Mm.
And so I'd forgotten that I was. And so what Walter's given me is he gave me the Old Testament as a birthday present. So what a gift that's been.
Yeah.
And realize that that's the story of our life and the narrative that we all can connect to and don't have to argue about.
Yeah. And how about this guy?
Exactly. So John I met in a church. I had to give a talk. I had read his work, The Careless Society. The guy from AT&T gave me his pamphlets, and John's thinking this is, about gifts. And he's the grows out of Ivan Illich, who's the most radical thinker I've ever read. It's amazing. Illich. And so I'm in this church, and I couldn't find the church, just as a side story, because it looked like a corporation. It was a modern church. I kept going back and forth in the address. Finally, I said, "That box is a church. Where's the steeple?" And I give a talk, and in the back of the room, John is sitting there, and I'm blown away by that. And he comes up, and we just became lifelong friends at that moment. And so he's had a huge impact on my thinking, mostly about gift-mindedness. And if you stay with the notion of gifts and gift-mindedness, it takes you a long, long way. It takes you everywhere. And it gives you an alternative frame to the kind of a deficiency, negative, angry speaking that we hear all around us. And so John, he's great. Both Walter and John, are older than I am. So Walter's 81, John's 84, and I'm younger than that. So I always say that John and I and Walter are examples of intergenerational cooperation. They're 8 years older than me. It's a nice picture.
And could you talk?
Wait.
Yeah.
You know what I like about the picture?
Yeah.
It's evidence that there was a moment in my life when I was listening.
And the gift. Could you speak a little bit more about the gift? As I listen, I'm thinking, how can I step more into that area, that space?
Well, one, you have to realize there's only one thing you have control over, all right? And that's what you pay attention to. And so at any moment, any time, once I get that, now it takes you about, 30 years to realize you do have choices to what you pay attention to, except in the middle of the night. And then you got no choice. You got to lay there and think the most useless, anxious thoughts that ever existed. I mean, your son is giving you the gift of not having to lie there alone in the middle of the night. You can go and pick him up.
Oh, yeah.
But so I can look at any situation without being optimistic, which I'm not, or Pollyanna, which I might be, and decide, so what's at work here? Well, I can see lots of things that are wrong. I can walk into, let's say, a marginalized neighborhood. Say I walk down the street and I see broken windows and empty hallways. It's a great Randy Newman song. So I can see that, or I can look around and say, so what's working here? Well, people know each other. It's not that crowded. The people getting by. So any place I go. Now, it doesn't mean I want to deny the suffering in the world. A war is a war. The world is the way it is. And one of the things I learned from Peter Kestenbaum was that he said, I can't relate to anybody that doesn't have a tragic sense of the world. And I totally identified that. That's why the joy word always makes me nervous. And so anytime I can say, well, so if I'm talking to you or anybody, I can say, what's the issue? What's the problem? Or I can say, what's working for you? What gifts do you have? And so John in his neighborhood work has people knock on doors. And usually when we describe the neighborhoods I'm interested in, people talk about what's wrong with the neighborhood, the mortality rate, income level, unemployment, school graduation, obesity. So if you look at the news tonight, which I can't do anymore, really, I can't watch the news in my own town. I find out what's wrong with the world, or I can, what John does is I knock on doors and ask people, what are you good at? What are you passionate about? What are you willing to teach others? What would you like to learn? And it's interesting if you ask that to a teenager or an old person, nobody asks them that. We've rendered teenagers useless. And to me, the problem with the youth is that they've got nothing to do that's useful. So the gift-mindedness is to have that question always available to you. It's not that you see the world as abundant, gifts overflowing, a cornucopia of gifts. I mean, there's too much suffering to see that. But it's always available. And you say, well, where am I doing my work as a consultant, as a change agent, or whatever we call ourselves? I can also always end every meeting by saying, here's what you did well in the last hour. Here's what worked well. Where the traditional world says, how can we do better next time? And I'm interested in that question, how can we do better next time? Because one, there is no next time, and because if we meet again, it'll always be under different circumstances with different outfits on. And what makes you think we're going to do better? Maybe this is as good as we get, so why not name and talk about that? So it's a way of living your life with many eulogies, which most of us are going to miss.
Yeah. What Marcella had a question.
See it.
You see, what do you think about
What?
I'll read the question for others. How do we live in a poisonous capitalist society without being poisoned? I find I'm thin-skinned, and it's getting so difficult to prevent the anger, fear, etc. of others to get inside.
That's a beautiful question. I always felt my job was to channel my rage. There's no way to live in a society with your eyes open without being afraid or angry. And I do yoga and all that, but nothing keeps me from getting irritated. So things get inside of me, especially things that I work on hard over a long period of time. And so I just always felt, well, there's things to be angry at. Some of my anger is misplaced, is a projection. So most of the stuff that gets to me is my own projection, my attributing to other people qualities I haven't come to terms with. But the other is to say, put that anger to use. It's an energy. That's what I've always done. Like when I write a book, so that's my most visible aspect. I write the book and I write. And then I stop and I breathe and I walk away for a few days and I come back and I realize 2/3 of what I've written is just pure rage, useless to nobody. And so I take it all out. Because it's easy to write about what's wrong with the world, but I needed to write it. Mm-hmm. And then I take it out and then try to write something constructive. And in that way, I've kind of honored and given expression to the rage instead of swallowing it. Because there's so many dimensions to Marcella's question. You don't want to take it in. Depression is anger turned inwards. So you need an outlet for it. You need a place to put it and use it and make it useful, let go, But I don't want to pretend that you can live in the world without being terribly upset about the suffering there's things I can't understand. I'm never in a car with Peter Kestenbaum. I asked him, I said, why is there so much suffering in the world? And he's an extremely positive person. I've never seen him get angry at anybody. And he thinks betrayal is useful. That's how open he is. And I said, why is there so much suffering in the world? And he's driving along and he just says, oh, that's a question for God. Don't bother me with it. I thought, good answer.
Do you think that God intervenes?
Not really, no. I don't think so. I think God has better things to do. And I don't associate suffering with God's failure. I think God is a placeholder for all that's unknowable, for mystery, for time, for depth, for all that's unknowable, and the placeholder, that idea of God. And I believe in God. But it never occurred to me to make a deal with God. I think I pray as a way of expressing my compassion for the world, but it's never with a request. It's a form of remembrance. So I don't think God's a player. Walter Brueggemann, I asked him once, I said, what about Cain and Abel? Come on, there's some stories in this Old Testament that are pretty dark. And Walter said, well, God is still in recovery for that mistake. So that's my version of God. Cain killed Abel, and God said, whoops, I made a mistake. So, a lot of people feel God is an interventionist, but I don't know how to construe that.
Yeah, I've really wrestled with that a lot. Over the last couple of years, it's been a big reflection of mine. I'm still wrestling with that.
Well, you become a parent.
Yeah. And so yeah, I have. And when Sandy Hook happened, it just threw everything out the window for me.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't think the same anymore. And then
it's how vulnerable. We're also vulnerable.
Yeah, it is very, very true. And then another kingdom, and your work with this is, I haven't read this. I'm going to get a copy. I'm really interested in learning more about the consumer culture and some of the stuff that you've been addressing in that. Here's a quote from that I thought was pretty provocative. Economic systems like the one we all live in, based on competition, scarcity, acquisition. How do you say that? Acquisitiveness. That's interesting.
That's close enough.
Acquisitiveness. I know what it's saying. I just didn't know how to pronounce it. Have become more than a question of economics. They have become the kingdom within which we dwell. That way of thinking invades our social order, our way of being together, and what we value. It replicates the kingdom of ancient Egypt, Pharaoh's kingdom.
Okay.
Could you speak a little bit more to that and what you all are exploring in the book?
See, Marcella in her chat says, as a society, we've sold ourselves a bill of goods that's turned out to be nothing but lies. And now we're left holding the bag. Well, that bag is because we've been sold the idea that when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping.
Yeah.
And what that means underneath it is that we believe that I can purchase everything I need in life. And so I've outsourced the raising of my children, the safety of my neighborhood, the health of my body. And so the argument is, and what Marcella's talking about, is that a friend of mine is a theology professor at Xavier, Adam Clark. He says consumerism is modern religion. And it doesn't mean excess, but what it means is whatever we want or have, it's not enough. And if I don't have enough, then I'm not enough. And so it makes me pray, victim of being sold something. And so the notion is that we have to reclaim back what I thought that the schools could do, what the police, I thought the police could keep me safe, and the schools could raise my children, and the doctor can keep me healthy. And all this talk about leadership making a difference. And so really the kingdom, the other kingdom, is about our freedom. And it's freedom from the consumer mindset that I've internalized. And it's interesting to me that poor people have internalized the consumer mindset as much as wealthier people. So I don't participate in the conversation about the rich doing a sin. They don't do a sin, they're just doing better than we are. But we're the same. We're also participants. And so ancient Egypt is a symbolism. Who knows whether it happened? Nobody cares. Of the Jews being slaves for 400 years. where everything was taken from their land, their cows, everything. And what Walter taught me is that the problem was the Jews could not imagine anything other than being a slave. And so we can't imagine anything other than a consumer mindset, a consumer ideology, and bombarded every day in 1,000 ways that tells me every measure of well-being is material. And so that's the movement, the counter movement. Is a movement towards an alternative economy, alternative measures of well-being. It gets very concrete. And that's the other kingdom.
Yeah. I thought this was interesting what Walter mentioned. The Sabbath, in the first instance, is not about worship. It is about work stoppage. It is about withdrawal from the anxiety system of Pharaoh, the refusal to let one's life be defined by production and consumption and the endless pursuit of private well-being.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'd be a fool to add anything to that.
Yeah.
But I think it totally changed my mind about the Sabbath. It is a work stoppage. Walter goes on to joke about it. He says, for that reason, because commerce and baseball wanted to play on Sundays, they always gave ministers a free seat in the bleachers. And Walter's a baseball fan. He says it worked. That was a marketing strategy to get Christianity to free up Sunday for commerce. Wow. And so the Sabbath, and so time, what part of what's people feel I'm in a hurry. Everybody else says there's so much to do. Life is at a faster pace. So part of the book is to recognize the political nature of time. And the fact is there's time for everything. And so part of the move to the wilderness is to say, well, of course there's enough time. Of course there's enough of everything we need. And, but it doesn't keep me from shopping.
And I think when we were talking, you mentioned something about commitment is really what is important here.
Yeah. Well, see that quote, I feel like I lived my life in between. What do you mean there's no such thing? That means my life has been an illusion, which it probably has. But I think the meaning of that word and that you're either in or you're out, there's no such thing as life in between, is that every time we think it's a question of methodology, it's really a question of commitment. Every time I think I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough examples, I don't have enough benchmarking, I don't have enough data, I don't have all these don't have enoughs are misstatements of the reality, which is I just haven't made up my mind. So anybody for years who's telling me they don't have time, I say, is it you don't have time or you just don't want to do it? That's why saying no is maybe the biggest commitment in your life is your capacity to say no. Mm-hmm. This is something I failed on miserably. I'm unable to say no. So I need people around me to say no for me. I'm so committed to being a good guy. It's paying off that bill I got at birth. But one of these days I'm gonna get mean. I just can't do it today. I'm gonna start tomorrow. I'm gonna start after this conversation, Steve.
That's good. I like the 11 films that you have in Faith and Community, and I like that little statement there, which says you can't grow community and transform the neighborhood through middle management. It takes a dance from the bottom up to make things new. I thought that was interesting. Yeah. To notice that you focused on middle management in that.
Well, because that's where most of us are, and the meaning underneath that quote is that we think the future can be produced through management, period. And lately, I just realized managers, what they're good at, and the manager in me is giving order and structure to the world, making it predictable, safer. And so we don't need more management. We don't need middle management. And what we need is, people, citizens like us, because nobody thinks they're on the top. I saw David Rockefeller, who did quite well, interviewed once. And the guy said, "What's it like to be royalty, be on the top?" He said, "I don't feel that way. I feel I'm slogging along trying to not lose my family's wealth." And I kind of believed it. And I kind of thought, well, nobody experiences themselves as the top. And so that's what we're all smack dab in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm revising the empowerment book. And so all that was a statement about it. Wherever you are, there you are. So get on with it.
Who was that comedian? What did he say? He said, "It's good to be the king." Well, who was that?
I don't know.
It was a funny movie, but he was playing on that concept.
Yeah, that's the illusion we all have. We think there's a top.
Yeah.
There's no top. It's a headless horseman.
Say hi to this guy. Fritz.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I never met him. In my 20s, I started to become aware of how unaware I was. I got thrown into running T groups and sensitivity training. And that was a wonderful starter job because you sit down with a group of 12 people. You're getting paid for this. And you say, okay, we're here to learn about ourselves and our relationships with each other. And we'll use the interaction of the group as the content and subject matter of our learning. And then you shut your mouth. And then everybody gets mad at you for about 5 hours. What do you mean? What kind of leadership is this? And I got that from my participation in Gestalt therapy. I would go to these amazing weekend workshops in my 20s and late 20s. And I would go there like everybody else saying, what am I doing here? It's a waste of time. And in Pearl's world, there's only 2 questions. One is, how do you feel? And the other is, what do you want? And those just, it's such meaning for me because I spent my life intellectualizing. I still live with the illusion if I can understand something, I can control it. And he said, what do you feel? And then he'd have this exercise where you sit and look at another person and you ask them, what do you feel? And they say, whatever they're feeling. And they say, now what do you feel? And they say what they're feeling. And you keep asking the questions 20 times in a row. Now what do you feel? Now what do you feel? And of course, it takes you somewhere. And then what do you want? And so I wrote a flawless consulting book based on that insight from Fritz Perls and Gestalt people.
Wow. John Carter at the Gestalt Institute, he and I were chatting, and he said he had described a story he had with Fritz, and that he was at one of these workshops that Fritz was leading, and John was working so hard to try to get his own breakthrough, and working so hard to get it, working hard. And he goes up to Fritz, and he's asking questions, and he goes up and asks, and it's Fritz Perls, as somebody asked out there, with Gestalt therapy. And he's up to him, and he says, can you give me something to work on? And he kind of looks at him, and he says, well, I just noticed that you touch your index finger to your thumb. He said that sent him on a tailspin for like years, trying to figure out what that meant. When did he do that, and what was he doing when that happened, and what was he feeling, and all that kind of stuff.
And that was the 70s.
Yeah.
And that was a time where awareness was dawning on. And then you have this quote, which is probably the most alienating piece of wisdom I've ever gotten. You want to read it?
Yeah. Where?
Fritz Perls, it's on your screen.
Yeah, yes. I do my thing and you do your thing. I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. You are you and I am I. And if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. Can't be helped.
See, it's a definition of forgiveness. It's poetry.
Yeah.
And it's about intimacy. What he's arguing for is not do your own thing, which he was taken as arguing for that. He's arguing to create conditions where intimacy is possible. And I think that's what our work is about. All the organization development, world It's not about planned change. It's about creating conditions where intimacy among people who work together is possible. And without that, then everything's an instrumental relationship. What's in it for me? Quid pro quo, all that foolishness.
Hey, there's my own little definition of family and friends, and I would add now, based on what you're saying, intimacy is those I choose to forgive.
It's a biggie to
Because
forgive and to stop judging. And, I mean, that's why this is a great quote, because I've been unable to accomplish what this thing demands. But you get moments. It's not a problem, but you're right.
yeah, it's like nobody's gonna. I'm going to be betrayed and disappointed. I'm going to disappoint myself and others. And I guess the only way to get to a place of intimacy with myself and others is to be forgiving.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That helps me think about that in another way.
It's a choice, Steve. I can decide to forgive. I don't have to wait till the feeling overwhelms me.
Can I show you a story of Corey Ten Boom? You know who she is by chance?
I don't.
She's a religious writer, and from a while, she was in a Nazi war camp, and she wrote a bunch on forgiveness. And she tells a story of she was giving a talk on forgiveness, and after the talk was over, she was meeting people, and she looked up, and somebody, this man was walking down the stairs, and she had this flash where she just was instantly back in the camp, and she was, and there he was. He was one of the guards in Ravensbrück, which is a camp that she was in, where she was in. And then she flashed back into the room, and then she flashes back, and her sister is naked and skinny, and she's thinking how skinny she is in front of her. Her whole family died. And she flashes back into the room, and this guy's walking towards her. And he walked up and he said, "It is good to know that I can be forgiven." And he raised his hand to her and he said, "Will you forgive me?" And she said, "Here I am. I just gave a talk on forgiveness." And it was just, she said, she just raised her, she just picked her hand up and put it in his hand and said, "I forgive you." And she said, so sometimes, I often think that forgiveness is not something you do. You feel good first and then you do second. It's an act, like you said. It's a choice.
Beautiful story.
Yeah. So, what do you think about bullies, and what would Fritz do with bullies?
I think Fritz was a bully.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't mind bullies. I just don't want to elect them president.
You want to talk about the current elections and what you think?
No, not really. But my boss, everybody's boss is a bully. There was a Nelson Algren, is that his name? He wrote a book. I forget the name of somebody will remember it. In praise of something. And he interviewed a guy, and he said, "Do you like Franklin Roosevelt?" This was back when FDR was president. He said, "Yes." He says, "Why do you like him?" He says, "He's the only president of the United States that ever understood that my boss is a son of a bitch." And I love that quote. And I think, bosses, the reality is bosses are surrogate parents, and they have power over you. And so they can soften it and sweeten it and be participative and listen and not make eye contact. But, that imbalance of power is going to be is a problem to be dealt with. And I have more sympathy for the boss in this quote than I do from the person writing. And when people are angry at their boss and tell me how they behave badly, I always ask them the question, why are you creating a boss like that? Why are you creating your boss in that fashion? And so that quote is a way we give power to people, make them more powerful than they deserve. They're just your boss. And so, now there is bullying There is discrimination and violence and abuse. And in those conditions, we have, as a culture, we have to do something about that. And, but as a generic boss being a bully, usually they're just your boss and get used to it, and you're never going to be their favorite. You know, the antidote to this is that at some point in your life, you say to your parents, I'm not the son you had in mind. I'm not the daughter you had in mind. And that's how you become a little more free. Because you're not there to meet the expectations of others. You're not going to, your boss doesn't really like you. You know, when I was doing leadership training, I would advise bosses to pull their subordinates in the room and say, you know, you're not my favorite. There's something about you just pisses me off, and that's never going to change. So why don't you just relax and we can work together? So that's one way to take that quote.
Wow.
You know, the election, the only comment I guess I would make a comment about it, it seems strange to me, and what the quote about the kind of world we live in is that candidates make so much money for the people reporting on them. And so I get upset about the nature of the reporting. I get upset about the dominant storyline and what we find news and what we find interesting. And to find bullying or whatever, or style or anything so newsworthy, that to me is criminal. I don't get so upset about who the candidates are because we're just creating them anyhow. Now, I do have my opinions, but not for this moment.
I understand. And there's some conversation going on in the chat room, and anytime you want, Peter, you feel it's appropriate, just you can pull one of the comments in or reflect. They're talking to each other, and so they're not alone in there. And but if there's something that's coming up, like there's a question that a person had around, you know, is there an entry magical potion?
I know. What's the nature of my transformation? How does that occur? And I think it's a decision to construct a different story about who you are. You know, one of my favorite quotes ever was a quote that says, "In Russia, even the past is unpredictable."
Mm.
And so you take your most cherished belief, and Margaret Wheatley does this all the time, and you say, suppose that wasn't true. Or you take the thing you're struggling with and saying, well, maybe that's just a story that I created about who I am. For example, I used to have a story about myself as an outsider, a gypsy, wandering Jew, nomad. And then about 10 years ago, for some reason, I got involved in my hometown, Cincinnati. And I realized that now I'm kind of a social being. I know people when I go out. I've got involved in different community activities. And so that took me to another place. Really, it was another version of myself. And so the entry drug into another kingdom, the entry drug is intimacy, relationships, love. Not in the abstract, but you just decide, what do I care about at this stage of my life, and how do I give myself over to that, knowing that my work will be in many ways futile. So I'm playing with the economy now is what I'm interested in, alternative economy. To me, the poverty is the root cause. The poor distribution of wealth is the root cause of most of our violence and most of our ill health and our longevity. And all the research says that people who grow up poor and believe that they're poor are going to live shorter lives and less healthy lives and less productive. So that's what I'm working on now. But what that does, it takes me into a world that I don't understand. It takes me into conversations I feel not very comfortable with. Not about guilt, it's just about understanding. So I'm talking about alternative economies. I don't know anything about economics. I just know that the system we have now is untenable. I can't live with it anymore. So I think the drug is your passion, it's your interest, your willingness to not know, go somewhere. And that's why I write books, is to get rid of these damn ideas. obsessed with thought. I've never been a person of action. Sometimes I don't even respect people who do things. You know? Why are you doing that? People call me an idealist. You know, I say thank you. So it's something
a lot of people struggling to write and get things out there in the world that they care about would say you do get things done. You just get the stuff that most people have a hard time getting done, which is writing their ideas down.
I discovered when I was late 30s and 40s that I had a voice and a mind. You know, I always thought I had a mouth and that I talked my way through the world, but I didn't have much of a mind for it. And I discovered in the writing that my ideas have value. So that's totally life-changing. And I don't quite get it. And so I'm able to do that. And it's hard to accept what you're good at. It's almost impossible.
Yeah. And this is, we're getting close to the end, and I have several people to talk with you about. I'm thinking that I'd rather not rush. I'd love to have another conversation with you again and kind of pick up where we are if you're up for that.
I am, Steve.
Okay, that's
no, let me respond. Are we at the very? We got Bruce asked these great questions.
Yeah.
He says, "How do we help make the world safer?" And the other thing I learned is that the questions are what are compelling, not the answers. And so, the answer is there's no way to make the world safer. This is what it means to be human. This is what I learned from Peter 35 years ago. Is that what I thought were problems would be to solve, which was loneliness and vulnerability and doubt, anxiety. He says they're the essence of being alive. It's what it means to be human. So as soon as I got that in my mind, I stopped trying to make the world a certain way, in a sense. Other ways, of course, I'm flailing away like everybody. But I don't know where safety resides. I think it resides in death, really. Mm. And so I'm kind of looking forward to it. I'm just worried about getting there.
Yeah, and looking to see if there's anything else. They were talking about equality in here. I thought there was an interesting comment in here around equality and where was that?
The equality of JJ says there has to be a sense of equality and mutual respect. I think equality to me is just a belief system. At some deep level, you realize that we're in this together. And that's why the idea of development is a great book called The Future of Development. Everybody should read that. And what it meant to me is that the idea that I know and you don't, or I'm here to help, or I'm here to develop, or the United States is going to help develop the lesser developed countries, is an expression of inequality. So charity, philanthropy, help, advice are all forms of inequality. That mean all say that I have something and you don't. And it's because I feel for you, which I do, I'm going to give you this money. I'm going to be charitable in this way. And so equality, the question evoked to me is that equality means I show up knowing that we're equal. And Edgar Kahn, C-H-A-N, calls that co-production, that the way to be with the world for people in our profession, and we choose our profession out of mostly generosity, that the way to be with people is to say we're going to both co-produce our way of being together. We're both going to co-produce a future. And I don't care what the world calls you or me, that every moment is a moment of co-production. And that's what you do, Steve. Generosity and love does.
I saw a little story yesterday where a professor, or it was kind of a teacher or something, took a $20 bill and said, who would like this? And everybody said, yeah, I'll take it. And he folded it in half and creased it. And Said, who would like it? And everybody raised their hand and said, yeah, I'll take it. And then he took it and balled it up and stepped on it and stomped on it and squished his foot on it. He picked it up and said, who would want it? Everybody said, I'll take it. And he said, the interesting thing here is this applies to you in life, and that, this $20, no matter how much I stomp on it and how much I creak it up and do stuff to it, it's still worth $20. And you'll take it. And a lot of times when you go into life, into situations, or we go into them, or I go into them, I sometimes go in not recognizing that in spite of being not respected, or in spite of being failed, or in spite of the worries or the challenges, or even the good stuff, like me thinking I'm worth more than $20, maybe, and a success and a huge thing. But just my worth is my worth that I bring to a situation. I have that. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
It's a great thought. Why would I put my value in someone else's hands? That's why God is useful. So if I have to put these things somewhere, well, I just put them in God's hands, and God will know what to do with it. And
yeah,
that's the world we're trying to create in your curriculum. You're trying to create a world, where of infinite value for each person.
Yeah,
that's what intimacy does.
Yeah. And thank you for the one day at the NEXUS conference when I was talking to you before that, and I didn't know if I'd have 50 people, or however many come, and you said you're not thinking big enough, and so that's been when it's always with me to challenge myself, to allow things to be bigger.
You're good at that.
What if it was possible? And so thank you for that, and a lot of other. For the group out there, I'd love to hear a phrase. What's your takeaway? What's something you're going to commit to as a result of today?
Well, wait a second. Those are tricky questions, Steve.
Yeah, so help me on that.
So don't ask people what they're going to commit to, because then you sound like the father.
Okay.
Ask them what struck them.
Okay.
And that invites lightning into the conversation.
Great. Okay, thank you. So what struck you today? And Peter, if I might say a couple other ways, I might say this. I'd say, what struck you? What's bubbling up for you? What are you walking away with? What are you still curious about? So I welcome your coaching, and how would you frame?
Sorry.
And I really welcome that. You're the best at it, and you've helped me. I'm always mindful of the questions I ask. So thank you. So for all everybody out there, what struck you? What's a bumper sticker? What's something that struck you today as you leave? And
people can't talk; they can only type.
Correct. I can bring people in if anybody raises their hand and wants to share as we check out. You can raise your hand, and I'll bring you in. By the way, Peter Kastenbaum is here with us. Peter.
How sweet is that?
What's that?
How sweet is that?
It is. It's very sweet. Hi, Peter. And I'm going to bring Pervez. Pervez, if you would like to share with us, I'm going to unmute you, and hopefully you got a good background and you got your speaker going. Hi, Pervez. You're unmuted. Okay.
Do they have to punch anything, star something to speak?
No. It just might be that they didn't mean to take their hand up, and that's okay. If anybody wants to speak, just raise your hand in the control panel, and I'll unmute you if you want to share what struck you today as you leave. And I will share one. Maybe we'll have Maggie is still here. Maggie, I'll ask you to maybe share what struck you today as you leave. So there's your dear Maggie, Peter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's an old view of Maggie.
What's that?
I said that's an old view of Maggie. Long time ago.
I love that smile.
Thank you. Well, that's still there.
Yeah, that's great. So what struck you today, Maggie?
Well, the thought of intimacy and creating conditions for intimacy. But also, I just want to say to Peter, it's been a great way to spend my lunch hour.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Meg.
And looking at in the group, what struck some people out there is the depth of conversation, Peter's way of looking at life. Marcellus has struck more people need more conversations like this so that we can keep the percolation on top of mind. Hi, Marcella. And Raul says futility and staying with it. JJ says co-production. Joe says Peter is coaching Steve, and Steve is being receptive to the coaching. Awesome. And Joe's he's written with me, and he was a student of mine a long time ago. We don't have, let's see here. April says we don't have to always have the answers, but we open to continuing to explore the process. Conversations like this are beneficial. Kate says creating conditions where intimacy is possible. Michael Ellison says, for me, lots of great questions. What's the question that if you have the answer to would set you free? So what's the workman here? What are you good at? What are you passionate about? Thank you. And so I think for me, what struck me is just I have goosebumps right now. I'm just sitting with this and sitting with you. So that's what struck me is just I feel very grounded and connected. Peter, you want to share what struck you today?
Well, your generosity and your openness to go anywhere. You create the space for me to say things that I didn't know I thought. So I'm very appreciative of that. And then the response, people writing in and, the modernism is the triumph of speed over depth. And so what you do, Steve, is try to hold that back. And what I got from Peter Kestenbaum, I'm thrilled that Peter's on the call, is that depth is the point. And so part of the work is to go deeper rather than faster, and have a view of the world that's complicated, where the marketing world wants to simplify everything. And so that's the gift of your curriculum, Steve, who you are, is that you create a space for depth and for ambiguity, for the world being complicated. The biggest fear I have with the election and who we're thinking of electing or might elect is certainty. That, to me, fundamentalism is the danger. I'm not afraid of the opposite point of view. I'm just afraid of a fundamentalism that says that I know and I'm right and I will take care of you. I find it terrifying. Not that that's being said, but there's such a big audience for that.
Well, Peter, I love you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. You're very sweet.
And Maggie, thanks for helping us get together and being there for Peter so we can be with him. And
My pleasure.
Yeah, so we're done for now. I'll be sending out another invite. We'll have a part 2 and continuation of our walk. And for today, enjoy the rest of it. Have a great day, and I'll talk with you all soon. Bye for now.
Bye, all.